Did Pete Alonso's playoff heroics keep him in a Mets uniform for the rest of his career? We'll talk about that on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, the biggest decision the New York Mets have to make this winter is whether or not to re-sign Pete Alonso. Now, you're going to say, wait a minute. There's some other free agents I might want more than Pete Alonso on this market. Maybe you just want to see the Mets add that ace pitcher, and Corbin Burnes is right atop your list when it comes to free agents you want the Mets to sign. Maybe it's Juan Soto, the best free agent in this class by far, a player the Mets have long been interested in. Maybe that is the guy you want to see the Mets target. While I agree that those two free agents would have a bigger impact on the 2025 Mets and beyond than Pete Alonso, what I said is this is the biggest decision the Mets have to make because there's so much that plays into it. You have a guy that is homegrown, drafted in the second round by the New York Mets, rookie of the year in 2019, multi-time all-star in a Mets uniform, a guy who is within spitting distance of being the all-time franchise leader in home runs in both the regular season and the postseason. He has a great legacy with the New York Mets. How many Mets fans tweet out LFGM? That was coined by Pete Alonso. I know I have a couple of those shirts myself. Pete Alonso, if you go to Citi Field, his jersey is probably the most prominent one you will find. I think you can make the case that he is the absolute fan favorite on this team. Francisco Lindor ate into that a lot this year, but there is something about a homegrown Met. So this decision, which will be made by Mets fans, although I think Steve Cohen's fandom will play in a little more than David Stern's fandom. But this is the most pressing discussion and debate going on in that front office right now as they plot the course for their offseason. There's no doubt about it. And I think this discussion changed with the October performance, not necessarily within that front office. I think there's still a dollar amount that they probably believe Pete Alonso is worth. And ultimately, I do believe that this free agency is most likely going to come down to that. What does the market say about Pete Alonso? And if the market says what I think it will, I believe he'll be back in a Mets uniform because I think whatever astronomical ask Scott Boras starts with, I don't think he's going to find it in the market. I think the team that can get the most creative, and we'll talk about this in the final segment, with Pete Alonso and structuring his contract for optics is the Mets. And I think the Mets might actually pay him the most still, but within reason. Here's where I think Pete Alonso's free agency might have impacted things a little bit, and that is Steve Cohen. I think Steve Cohen understands this fan base, and ultimately he wants to do right by this fan base, and keeping homegrown Mets who have a legacy is an important thing. Steve Cohen got as frustrated as all of us did when other homegrown Mets went to another team. And since he has taken over, for the most part, they have kept those guys. They kept Brandon Nimmo. Edwin Diaz, not a homegrown Met, but spent most of his career at the Mets, had an historic 2022 season. The Mets re-signed him before he even hit free agency. Jacob deGrom was the exception, and part of that was because Jacob deGrom had a huge injury question, and in his first year pitching for another team, he needed Tommy John surgery. Pete Alonso is durable. Pete Alonso is marketable. Pete Alonso is productive. Here's the thing, though. What did the postseason do for him? And what I believe it did is I think it erased what was, I can't say a bad contract year, but a lackluster contract year for Pete Alonso. Among qualified first basemen, Pete Alonso ranked 4th in WRC+, still very productive, a 122 WRC+. And for those of you who aren't aware, that is weighted runs created plus, a park-adjusted stat that measures hitters on a league average of 100. So it tells us that if Pete Alonso has a 122 WRC+, he is 22% better than your league average hitter. If Bryce Harper had a 148 WRC+, and don't quote me on that one, I'm just pulling that number out. I did not mark that in my notes, but I do know his WRC+ was better than Pete Alonso. If it was 148, he was 26% better than Pete Alonso. This year, the 3 first basemen who had a better WRC+ than Pete was Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bryce Harper, and Freddie Freeman. You look at his OPS, on base plus slugging. 788 was the 6th best in baseball. It trailed Vladdy, Harper, and Freeman, also trailed Christian Walker and Matt Olson. Here's the big drop-off. Pete Alonso's slugging percentage. 459 this year. That was 6th best among all first basemen. For his career, though, Pete Alonso has a 514 slugging percentage. He never finished the season outside of 2020. I think it was still in the 490s, but that was a shortened season. In full seasons, he had never finished with a slugging percentage below 500. His career on base percentage, 339 this year, 329. After cutting his strikeout rate below 25% from 2021 through 2023, his strikeout rate climbed almost back to 25% again. It was at 24.7%. His walk rate remained right about around where it's been all of his career, around 10%. Did balloon to over 20% in October, which shows you how feared he still was among the best pitchers in the biggest moments. Here's the thing about Pete Alonso, though. In a down year where the contract was weighing on him, he still hit 34 home runs and drove an 88. Now, those home runs, again, were the most among first basemen, RBIs, 8th most. He was not good in the clutch, though, which is where the playoffs changed things, because in clutch situations, Pete Alonso this year in high leverage spots had a 662 OPS, hit 196. In medium leverage spots, 241 average, 753 OPS. With low leverage, 834 OPS, 247 average. 22 of his 34 home runs came in low leverage situations. 11 came in medium leverage situations, all this deemed by FanGraphs, and only 1 came in high leverage situations. In September was the worst month of the season when it comes to OPS for Pete Alonso. He hit 222. He got on base at a 343 clip. He slugged at a 378 clip. I'm kicking myself for not marking that OPS. Quick math here, 600, 700, and 721 OPS, I believe. But it was his lowest mark of the season in September when the games mattered the most. To close out the year across the Mets' final 9 games, Pete Alonso went 4 for 40 without a home run, and that carried over through his first 8 at-bats in October. So he had a stretch of going 5 for 48 without a home run until Game 3 of the wild card round. Mets trailing 2-0, 2 runners on, 1 out. Pete Alonso takes the first pitch for a strike, then works a 3-1 hitters count against Devin Williams, one of the best relievers in baseball, a guy who has not seen his changeup hit out of the ballpark outside of, I think, 1 time in the regular season, and rarely opposite field. And Pete Alonso takes a changeup that was belt high on the outer half, and he put it into the seats, hits a 3-run homer, game-winning shot, keeps the Mets playoffs alive, their playoff run, and it turns into a run where they were 2 wins away from the World Series. Across 13 games in October, Pete Alonso hit 273, got on base at a 431 clip, 568 slug, 4 home runs, 10 RBIs, 10 runs scored, a 999 OPS. He was every bit the same guy that we've seen throughout his career, who is extraordinarily feared by opposing pitchers, who will take his walks when they're given to him, and who can hit the ball a very long way and break open games, change games. Pete Alonso delivered in the biggest moments in October. And what I believe that did is I think that erased or maybe bridged the gap between what he's been throughout his career, what he was this year, which was a step below his career numbers. I think Pete Alonso enters the market about where we thought he would be at the start of the season. So if that's the case, how does this impact his free agency? We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the next segment. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can now start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place that first $5 bet. Win or lose, you're going to get those $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Maybe you got a team you like in the World Series, whether it's the Dodgers or the Yankees, you throw $5 on it and you win no matter what because you're going to get those $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sports book. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 11,000 subscribers by the end of the World Series. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's talk about Pete Alonso's free agency. Despite the perceived down year, he is still, I think, head and shoulders the best first baseman on the market. It's him and Christian Walker, but Christian Walker is entering his age 34 season, and he fell off down the stretch. Granted, he got hurt. I think it was an oblique injury. So that's to be, totally understood that an injury like that will derail you. I think it was oblique, but he definitely did deal with something there down the stretch. Overall, though, Pete Alonso has been far more productive in his career than Christian Walker. And again, Walker will be 34 years old. Paul Goldschmidt hits the market after a down year. But what is Goldie, like 37 now, if I'm not mistaken? I mean, he's closer to hanging it up than otherwise. Yeah, he just turned 37 in September. So I just can't imagine he's going to have the biggest of markets, right? Beyond that, you got Anthony Rizzo, Josh Bell, Carlos Santana, probably coming off a better year than all those guys. Justin Turner. Not a lot of good first basemen on the market. The Mets have to make a decision here, and I think what everyone is really talking about when it comes to first base is you could have Mark Vientos slide over to first base, and he is your Pete Alonso replacement. You figure out third base later with all of your infield prospects that are on the precipice of being part of this big league roster, and you sort of roll from there. But if you do that, you're counting on Brett Beatty at third base or Ronnie Mauricio. Are you sure those guys can hold down that position? I get it. If you sign Juan Soto and that is where you decided to spend your money and you can't spend it on both, I think all of us would be totally okay with that. All right, goodbye to Pete Alonso. Hate to see you go, but it is what it is. With that said, barring signing Soto, the Mets will take a big step back offensively if they don't sign Pete next year. There is no way around that, in my opinion. Look at the other free agents on the market. Yeah, they can maybe sign Anthony Santander, but it's not like he's going to help your defense in the outfield. Maybe you could sign Teoscar Hernandez. Is he going to repeat the season he had with the Dodgers? We saw this year with JD Martinez. There could be a little bit of fool's gold there. Alex Bregman would be the other option, right? He's the other big free agent. So you could move off of Pete, move Vientos to first, put Bregman at third. But Bregman might cost more than Pete Alonso, and he doesn't have that tie to the fan base. He's always going to be an Astro. He won championships with the Astros. He's always going to be just the guy the Mets signed. He's going to deal with a ton of pressure coming over to New York, a guy that struggled himself in the contract year to a greater degree than Pete Alonso, at least earlier in the season. He was able to bounce back and still have a 4-win season. Still is great defensively at third, or at least very good. Still hit 26 home runs, although that could have been aided by the Crawford boxes in left field in Houston. For me, if that's the decision the Mets are making, sign Peter Bregman, it would be a no-brainer in my mind just because Pete Alonso means so much to this fan base. I don't think your offense gets better with Alex Bregman. I think your defense gets better, but I don't know how much of an upgrade that really is, and I think Bregman's going to get potentially more years and definitely more money. He is really the only third baseman to speak of in this market unless the Diamondbacks turn down their $15 million club option on Eugenio Suarez. He has a $2 million buyout on that, so it's basically looking more like, are you going to turn down $13 million to get rid of him? Like, do you want to save 13 to get rid of him or pay 15 to keep him? I think he probably stays in Arizona, so then Bregman's sort of the only third baseman on the market, and I think teams are going to pay more of a premium for that. So I don't believe that Bregman is a realistic target for the Mets. So if you're looking at the market again and you're talking about your offense that was World Series caliber this year, I really believe the only reason the Mets aren't playing in the World Series this weekend is because of their pitching. With that in mind, you will take a step back if you decide to move on from Pete Alonso. Vientos might be able to match his production, but who's going to match what Vientos would give you at third base? That's the big thing here for me. This season, when you look at power hitting duos at first and third, Pete Alonso and Mark Vientos ranked second in Major League Baseball when it comes to home runs. They had 61 between them, 27 for Vientos, 34 for Pete Alonso. You look at the Guardians, they had the best mark, 39 from Jose Ramirez, 31 from Josh Naylor. If you want to get super creative, I think the Guardians might trade Josh Naylor. So if you really wanted to, you could trade for Josh Naylor, have him be a one-year stopgap at first, but we're getting ahead of ourselves even talking about that. Other great combos at first and third. You had Eugenio Suarez with 30 at third base, Christian Walker 26. They had 56 home runs between them in Arizona. The Braves obviously have a great duo, Matt Olson, Austin Riley, although it was a down year for both of them. Olson had 29, Riley had 19. Phillies have Harper and Bohm. Harper 30 home runs, Bohm only 15. Dodgers, Freeman and Muncy, 22 for Freddie, 15 for Muncy. Cardinals had Goldie and Arenado, Goldschmidt 22, Arenado 16. But I don't think it's far off to say that going into next year, there would not be a better duo of power hitters at the corners in the infield than Pete Alonso and Mark Vientos, especially because I believe Naylor won't be on the Guardians next year. And that was the top group this season. Now, you might say Olson and Riley. I think that'd be the one that would be the biggest sort of counter to Vientos and Alonso. But you're talking about the possibility of getting 80 home runs between Pete Alonso and Mark Vientos. Mark Vientos, when you look at what he did in the regular season and the postseason, you combine it, he was on a 40 home run pace over 162 games. I think even better than that after that last homer. So he's got that in him. I've been saying that since he was a prospect, that if he had, a full season of playing time at the big league level, he could run into 40. Pete Alonso, he's got 40 home run pop, but they both settle in at 35. 70 home runs from your corner infield spots. That is as good as the Mets have had it since Delgado and Wright. So I don't think we should just ignore that and say, oh, yeah, let Pete Alonso walk. Your offense will take a big, 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 big hit if you don't re-sign Pete Alonso unless you sign Juan Soto. That's the only way that your offense would remain the same, and it would be better because Juan Soto is a better hitter than Pete Alonso. You look at it, if that's the outcome, again, I'm not going to be mad at it if the Mets decide to save money in the infield, keep Vientos and move him to first, and have Beatty, Mauricio battle it out for third base. The defense would be good if Beatty is the third baseman. There's a chance that Ronnie Mauricio could transition to third base, and he might be a better offensive player than Brett Beatty when it's all said and done. Maybe even Luis Angel Acuna can get some reps at third base. You have some young guys that could fill that spot, but I don't think any of them are a guarantee. I think all of them are a big step down from Mark Vientos. You look at the top four of a lineup that has Juan Soto, not Pete Alonso, it's very good. If it's Lindor, Nimmo, Soto, Vientos, that's fantastic. But you could keep Pete Alonso and still sign Juan Soto. I don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive where you have to get one or the other. I think you can get both. And ultimately, I think the Mets should re-sign Pete Alonso because he means that much to the team and because I believe that gives them the best infield possible in 2025. And this is a win now team. I'm going to talk about the contract a little bit in the next segment and why I think those pieces fit together and should stay together, where Mark Vientos and Pete Alonso should be teammates. Vientos should not be just the Alonso replacement. So we're going to go through that in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you versus the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. You watch the winnings roll in. So now the NBA season's back. You can look at points scored any given night. You can look at fantasy score, rebounds, assist. You pick more or less on your favorite NBA stars who you believe are going to do well. You combine them on a single play. You can win big. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB. You're going to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks. Get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure to become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the match. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. I'll be sending you some exclusive information throughout the playoffs when I'm doing some of the research on these shows, previewing free agency, talking about guys I like. Insiders will get that access first. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so Pete Alonso and Mark Vientos, long-term fit in the Mets infield. I understand the thought that it's not viable defensively, but let's really dive into it. One of the duos that I failed to mention when I was talking about other power hitting duos at first and third, the reason I didn't mention is because one of the guys was hurt a lot this year, but it's out in Boston. Tristan Casas and Rafael Devers. Rafael Devers is not a good defensive third baseman. I honestly think that is one of the better comps for Mark Vientos, just as a guy that hits the ball hard. Devers is a better overall hitter than Vientos, but this year Vientos' numbers weren't even that far off from what Devers put up. They've gotten by with him at third base for years now, and that has opened up first base to be played by other offensive-minded players. Now it's Casas. For the Mets, Mark Vientos has showed one trait that I think should allow him to stay at third. That's his arm. His arm is a huge advantage over at third base. He has a cannon. He can make up for a little bit of a lack of quickness with his hands with his arm. And I think we never really saw, outside of those plays where the infield was drawn in and the ball was hit to Vientos, those quick read plays, we didn't see his defense really hurt the Mets too much throughout the playoff run. Like I said, those couple plays, those weren't great. And I think in some respects, you have similar issues with Pete Alonso at first base when it comes to those quick reads, the quick decisions. If Mark Vientos slid over to first base, how would he fare there? I think he would be a very good defensive first baseman because I think the areas where Pete Alonso struggles, Vientos could be better. You look at Pete Alonso's defense, and he's great around the bag. Great around the bag when it comes to making picks, being a big target. He's a big dude, reaching up high, going left, going right. He is very good with his stretches. I think Pete Alonso is above average around the base. Now, where Pete Alonso isn't great is flipping the ball to the pitcher when he fields grounders. Bad at that. And he's bad at turning two. Okay? Vientos' arm, if he moved to first base, I think he would be good at turning two. I think he'd learn the position well. I think he has showed the work ethic to be a very good defender if he sticks his mind to it. I think at third base, him working really hard, he can get to league average is what I think. I think at first base, he might be able to get above league average. And I understand the draw in that, the draw in having an upgrade defensively and hopefully a near clone offensively. And then you get a better defender at third base who can hopefully hit, and that makes your infield better. But how long did it take to find any answer at third base? The answer is a decade, from David Wright to Mark Vientos. And entering right back into that, because you want to save some money on Pete Alonso, I don't know if that is the right course of action when you can just keep Pete, keep Vientos at third, and guess what? If you leave the DH spot open, the Mets could have a situation where, Brett Beatty or Ronnie Mauricio is actually hitting at the big league level and playing a good third base. Mark Vientos is your DH. No harm in that. And if Vientos keeps working at first and third, he can spare those guys. You can have a rotation. If you want to, at some point, you move Pete Alonso off of first and make Mark Vientos your first baseman if Brett Beatty is the answer at third. There is nothing wrong with Pete Alonso being paid whatever it is to be your DH. That's perfectly fine. Might help him age. But the thing about Pete Alonso, don't discount his durability. The guy got drilled in the wrist this year. Didn't miss a game. Jeff McNeil got hit by a 75-mile-an-hour curveball and was out for a month. Pete Alonso had his truck flip over when he was going to spring training and came out without a scratch. This guy is an Iron Man. And so I think if you're thinking about the long-term viability of Pete Alonso, how is he going to age? I think he's going to age just fine. You see what Giancarlo Stanton's doing in the playoffs right now? Giancarlo Stanton's a much more twitchy athlete, and that's why he's had a ton of injuries. But when it comes to see-ball, hit-ball, raw power, it is still there. I don't think that goes away from Pete Alonso. I don't think his athleticism is going to deteriorate in any way that's meaningful. I think Pete Alonso can be pretty much what he has been for the next 5 years. I really believe that, especially when the pressure of the contract is off. So if that is your analysis of the player, that he can still be a 40 home run threat for the next 5 years, driving 100 every season potentially, and your biggest concerns are his infield defense, and I think by metrics, it's worse than what we watch. When you have a DH spot that's open, so you can always move him off of it, I don't really see a reason to just wave goodbye to Pete Alonso because you don't want to pay him, unless the contract's crazy, and I don't think it will be crazy. We've done this a lot throughout the past year and a half, but I don't see the Pete Alonso suitor. I really don't. I don't see who out there is just going to go crazy to get their hands on Pete Alonso and it's going to give him $200 million. I don't see it. You look around the market, and I was trying to find Pete Alonso landing spots. Here's what I came up with. The Yankees. They could use a first baseman if they don't sign Juan Soto. I wrote an article about this year, how Soto and Alonso could trade places. The Mets end up outbidding the Yankees for Soto, and they're not going to spend on Alonso. I could see Pete Alonso falling into the Yankees' laps on a good contract, and they could keep rolling with what they got. So that's one team. The Tigers, if they want to spend now, they have a pretty clear, cap sheet here. They could move off of Spencer Torkelson, who had a really bad year. They could sign Pete Alonso. Don't necessarily know if I see that, though, because are they really going to go all in on Pete? I don't know. Mariners, maybe, but when have they spent on a first baseman on a free agent outside of Robinson Cano? The Astros could potentially use a first baseman. I think that could be a sneaky team that might be interested. The Cardinals, if they want to replace Paul Goldschmidt with Pete. The Giants, maybe, but I don't know if I even say that one. The one team that actually kind of jumped out that I could see actually putting an aggressive long-term offer in front of Pete is the Washington Nationals, just because they don't really have that many players on their books. Patrick Corbin's coming off. They have a young budding core that's coming up, and Alonso has killed the Nationals. I could see that. I really could. Daniel Murphy-esque. But which team is giving him 7-8 years? That's what I don't know. So here is the contract that I proposed for Pete Alonso all the way back in August. So let's see if I can actually pull this thing up. I should have uploaded it into our StreamYard. Here it is. All right. I don't know if you guys can even read this. I'm actually struggling to myself here. Okay. And I got it pulled up on the full screen. All right. So here's the contract. And shout out to Christopher Soto, who worked this up for me. He is an accountant that loves baseball math. You can find him on Twitter at SotoC803. And I asked him back in August, I said, look, do me a favor. Can you do the math on a deferred contract that's 7 years long that gets Pete Alonso to that deal the Mets reportedly offered him after the deadline or around the deadline in 2023? And that was a 7-year, $158 million deal. So here's the contract, $200 million, 7 years. And that was the other parameter I gave Chris. I said, I want to get to that $200 million number. How much money has to be deferred? So it would be $12 million deferred a year out of an average annual value of $28.5 million. What does that all mean? Okay, deferred money, Shohei Ohtani made it famous, but other players had done this. You get deferred money in your contract, and then that lowers the average annual value for luxury tax purposes. So in this case, a 7-year, $200 million contract for Pete Alonso really is 7 for 158.4, which is $22.6 million per season. That is the average annual value. So that has him clock in a little above Brandon Nimmo per year. Now, I could even make the argument now that maybe you wouldn't even have to give him a 7th year. Maybe it's a 6-year deal. So instead of 7 for 200, it's 6 for 172. And maybe instead of having the $84 million deferred, it is $72 million deferred, right? So now all of a sudden his contract present day money value is 6 for 135, which clocks in just below Freddie Freeman's of 6 for 148 after his deferred money was taken into account. His actual contract was 6 for 162, but he had deferred money that pushed that value down to 148 for the Dodgers. Bottom line, with deferred money, the Mets can make the money work where Pete Alonso can get a big gaudy number, but ultimately come in right around Brandon Nimmo where it's less than $25 million per season. And Steve Cohen can absolutely afford to pay, when it comes to luxury tax, which is the only number that matters for him, $34 million for Lindor. I think Nimmo is like 20 and a half, but don't quote me on that one. And then Alonso at 22 and a half. Put it all together, you're looking at what? 43. So less than $80 million for those three players, right? The Mets can afford that. And you can keep this core together. You can add to it. You can even still sign Juan Soto. I think the Mets can afford whatever they wanted to, and they'd be fine. I don't think the money gets that crazy where you can't re-sign Pete Alonso. I think the market is going to speak on Pete. They're going to come back to the Mets, and these two sides are going to hammer out a deal because he means too much to the franchise. And I think it could be affordable. It might not even be the 7-year deal. The Mets might be able to get him on a 5-year deal where he gets $25 million per, and it's 125. I think this works out where Pete Alonso stays in the Mets uniform. And I think what the playoffs did is it erased the struggles from this year, the frustrations around Pete Alonso. Look, I made what I would say is my biggest mistake covering the New York Mets. Not even just for the 6 years I've been doing this show, going all the way back to when I was a 19-year-old writing for Metsmerized, where I let my emotions get the best of me during that wild card game 3. And all year I've been doing the reverse jinx thing, right? Or I had been doing the reverse jinx thing until that moment where you tweet out what you don't want to happen, so it happens, because if you tweet out what you do want to happen, it won't happen. That's just superstitious fan stuff. And when I had sent out a tweet about how the game was going to end on a Pete Alonso strikeout, because I did the math, after the 2 home runs in the 7th inning and Pete Alonso was due up 7th, I'm like, this is going to line up where Pete Alonso is going to come up with the game on the line. And this is what I don't want to happen, so I'm going to put that out there. Then when I was frustrated because Pete Alonso dropped a pop-up, I sent out another tweet talking about him not being clutch and being mentally weak, which was completely wrong and the biggest mistake I have made. It feels like it's aggressive to say in my career, but like I feel really bad about how the optics of that tweet in retrospect. Not just because he hit the home run, but because if you hit 150 pop-ups, the same ones that Pete Alonso couldn't catch, and you put me right where the ball was going to land, I would only catch like 2 of them. So for me to say anything about it, when I was playing baseball, I couldn't catch a pop-up to save my life. That's why my only position that I was good at was pitcher, where all I had to field was ground balls. For me to have said that, I crossed the line, and I sincerely apologize to Pete. I'm glad he proved me wrong, made me look stupid. And I don't think I'll ever do the reverse jinx thing again. But the point is that the reason why I had gotten to that point of exasperated frustration as a fan is because I watched the whole season where Pete Alonso did not get the job done and struggled and felt the weight of his contract. And I think what happened this October is he zeroed in, he locked in, he had what I would say is a top 3 home run in Mets history. Paul Francis Sullivan, the host of Locked on MLB, call him Sully. He was actually messaging me back and forth, and he's doing a series over there where he is ranking the top 3 home runs in franchise history for each team. And he said number 1 for the Mets, Mike Piazza after 9/11. Could not agree more. Number 2, he said Dykstra in 86. Number 3, I think he said like 1999. I can't remember the home run. Obviously, Mets fans who weren't 4 years old at the time would know exactly what homer he was talking about. Let me see if I can pull it real quick. Was it Olderud? 1999. Let's see, Sully. What did you tell me? Todd Pratt. 1999 Division Series. And then I said, well, I think Pete Alonso passes it. And he agreed. Pete Alonso, that home run, top 3 all-time franchise history. If it had resulted in a World Series, it might have been even higher. But for the Mets to be facing elimination 2 outs away, hits that homer, it's one of the biggest homers we will ever see. Now, you add that to a legacy that already was so pronounced across his 6 years with the team, and it erases everything that went bad this year. And then he went on to have a magical playoff run beyond that, where he was the old Pete Alonso, where he walked 20% of the time because guys didn't want to lose to him, and he took those walks. He was disciplined. He hit his home runs. He drove in his runs. He had a 999 OPS. He did everything. And I think what you would get from Pete Alonso if you do re-sign him, I'm not going to say he's going to walk 20% of the time in the regular season and have a 999 OPS, but do I think he'd slug over 500 next year and hit 40 bombs and drive in 100? I absolutely think he would. Do I think Mark Vientos would hit 30-plus bombs and be a passable defensive third baseman? Yes. And anything else that happens, if you develop another third baseman and you have too many mouths to feed at that position, you keep DH open. You can always move Pete to DH or Vientos to DH, and it's a great problem to have eventually. But right now, there is not a clear-cut third baseman of the future behind Mark Vientos. Your best bet still is Brett Baty, because he showed he could be a good defensive third baseman, but he has not hit a lick yet in the big leagues. And I still like Brett Baty. I do. But I'm not saying goodbye to what should be the all-time franchise home run leader, one of the best hitters this franchise has ever produced. You could make an argument that based on what he did in 6 years, he might be the best hitter they've ever produced, or at least the best power hitter they've ever produced, even better than Darryl Strawberry. And maybe that's my recency bias of who I got to watch. But for the New York Mets to say goodbye to Pete Alonso because they don't want to pay him, which I think the contract is going to be reasonable. I don't think he's going to surpass Freddie Freeman and Matt Olson and all these other guys. I don't think he's going to sniff Miguel Cabrera and Prince Fielder, the contracts that Scott Boras says you have to look at for Pete Alonso. He's not going to get that. So if this comes down to 5 years, 125, if this comes down to giving him a bloated contract with a ton of deferrals that actually make it a team-friendly deal, whatever it is, I'm in the camp that the New York Mets should re-sign Pete Alonso and keep Mark Vientos at third base and keep what was a big strength of their team this year together, because I think that strength will be even better when you get a full year of Mark Vientos after the experience he just got, and you get Pete Alonso locked up, no longer worried about the contract, no longer worried about where he's going to spend the rest of his career, knowing he's a forever New York Met. I think that is worth its weight in gold when it comes to value to this franchise. I think they should get it done. That's where I'm at with it. We'll continue to talk about it throughout this winter, but I believe the polar bear should stay in hibernation here. Was that a lame pun? Whatever. That's where we're going to close the show, unfortunately. I appreciate all of you who tuned in. Tomorrow's show, we're going to break down what the Mets need in free agency, because then on Friday's show, we're going to talk about Juan Soto for the first time. What should you root for as a Mets fan during this World Series? We're going to go through that to close out the week. I appreciate all of you who tuned in. If you don't want to miss out on any of your Locked On Mets content and you are listening on the podcast side of things, follow, rate, review. That also helps the show. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every single day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything. World of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league, on Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.